On today's show, the Lakers offense falls apart completely against the Charlotte Hornets. Ja Morant trade rumors out of nowhere, and who has the most riding on the rest of this NBA season? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA Game Night.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. And joining me for the closing stretch of the NBA season is my partner in crime, David Ramil, host of Locked On Heat. David, are you so excited to talk about this Lakers-Hornets game?
One game on the slate after covering every team just a week ago. We're down to just one team, and it wasn't even particularly great basketball, but it was still a close game, and it was a lot of fun to watch. So let's get into it.
Oh, man. You know, it's so weird that we went from 15 games one night, which is absolutely absurd, and then we come down to one. It would have been zero. It would have been zero if not for this game being rescheduled due to the scheduling issues with all the wildfires and everything happening out in the Los Angeles area. So, again, thoughts and prayers out to everybody still dealing with the ramifications from that. But let's go ahead and dive into this and figure out what exactly went wrong for the Lakers in this game against a really bad Hornets team. Let's go out to Locked On Lakers for more.
Emanetsky, co-host of Locked On Lakers podcast, and the Lakers return from the All-Star break with a 197 loss in LA to the Charlotte Hornets. I guess Mark Williams got his revenge game, even though he wasn't much of a factor other than catching a body on a LeBron James monster dunk. The Lakers led by as much as 13 points pretty late into the third quarter, but a bad series of events. Austin Reeves gets ejected. The Lakers start getting very befuddled by a Hornets zone defense. The Hornets start getting on a massive run, and the Lakers offense was just very gummy, very off-kilter. They shot 29% from three. Very little synergy between LeBron and Luka, who had a rough night himself. 14 points, 5 of 18 from the field, 11 assists and 8 rebounds, but also 6 turnovers. So a lot for the Lakers to work on. For more Lakers coverage, make sure you're watching Locked On Lakers on YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcasts.
You know, David, this is one of those where, first off, I got to say, we're also knocking off the rust here for our post-All-Star break stretch. We want to thank you for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, with that taken care of, let's look. This was a game that was not fun to watch. It looked very ugly early on. Luka had 5 turnovers in the first 6 minutes of this game. Two teams that very much looked like they were dealing with the, All-Star break hangover, whatever, trying to knock off the rust, get back into the rhythm of regular season basketball. And to Andy's point, the Hornets went on this insane run to close out the third quarter, a 17-1 run to close the quarter over roughly the final 4-ish minutes or so of play. And then that run actually extended into the fourth quarter. It was, I think by the end of it, it was a 23-1 run where Hornets just started knocking down shots. They were picking on Luka a lot defensively in that stretch, especially once he was back in there to start the fourth quarter. But it was really the offensive side of for the Lakers. They couldn't get anything to go offensively. The zone really threw them off, and it was just way too much your turn, my turn, no ball movement. It was if you're a Lakers fan, are you concerned watching this performance against a very bad Hornets team?
No, I think it's the rust is a significant factor, and I think you have to acknowledge that is that they came back and they looked discombobulated, and they're trying to fit these new pieces together, and that's going to take some time. So it was a perfect storm of trying to combine these different things all at once while you're still trying to make your way back after the All-Star break. So I'm particularly concerned. Ask me in a week or two if we're starting to see similar results, and then yes, that's when you can legitimately have some concern about the fit of these players. But eventually water will reach its level. And I think that's the case with this Lakers team. I think they played well defensively. The Hornets, for all their lack of wins this season, they still are ignitable. LaMelo Ball obviously is putting up some big numbers, and he caught a little bit of fire later on and during that stretch as well. They got some key contributions from other players across the board. So it's not like they're incapable of going on these runs. And the Lakers' defense wasn't particularly good either. But if you're looking at their offense and you're saying, is it a worry? No, not yet. Not yet. I think it's still too early. You're still trying to figure out how to mesh these players together. Eventually, they'll figure it out. LeBron James and Luka Doncic are too good, and the cast around them, I think, is accomplished enough. And look, LeBron James has always been a very singular type player, and that whenever anybody's learning how to figure out how to play alongside him, it's a process. It takes time. You're not exactly sure when that pass is going to be delivered. You have to constantly expect something different. He's very, very different. And Luka is the same way. So you're talking about two players that are cut from a very similar mold and having to adjust to learn how to play alongside them. And now you're both on the same roster. It's going to take some time. It's never going to be perfectly seamless as much as it might seem like that. Only like in an all-star setting where people are playing defense or something like that, can you get these two kind of uber talented offensive players to work together and have it be a seamless fit. When an actual NBA game is being played, it's a lengthy process. It's an adjustment period, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But I'm not concerned right now. I think it'll be fine eventually.
Understanding that it's going to take time is one of the reasons that I'm not very bullish on this Lakers team, at least for the rest of this season. Now, you can talk me into a squad with Luka and LeBron and the right pieces around them after they kind of retool and move some things around on the roster this offseason. But the biggest thing that stood out, and I'll highlight here really quickly before getting to this other concern, is just the Lakers actually had a chance to pull this one out, even despite the fact that they collapsed, egregiously into the third quarter. Rui Hachimura missed two key free throws that could have tied the game up at 96-all. LaMelo Ball had a drive and scoop through multiple defenders to put the Hornets up 4. And even after all that, LeBron hit a ridiculous under pressure three-pointer to make it 98-97, down just 1. They had enough time left. LaMelo hit a couple clutch free throws, and LeBron got not one, but two, one really good look at the 3 at the end to tie it up and send it to overtime. And then a second look off an offensive rebound. And just at that point, you tip your cap to the Hornets and move on to the next game. But the other thing that really stood out to me in this one, David, was, look, we know the defense is going to be rough, but they were absolutely picking on Luka every possession down the stretch. And there were a couple possessions where the Hornets really did get the better of the Lakers, where they baited out the double team. There was one where it was DFS and Luka just sitting on LaMelo Ball, and they just waited and waited and waited. And here's the thing, the way the defensive rotation should have worked, LeBron was the defender who ultimately didn't rotate and gave up a wide open corner three-pointer. And I cannot tell you how many times, I think we need a bingo card or something to predict how many times this is going to happen over the rest of this regular season and across any potential playoff series we see. I understand, and I know that LeBron is a guy who can dial up the defensive intensity when he wants to, when he needs to, especially in what is likely to be a playoff environment down the line. Right. But for the rest of this regular season, you've got two very huge defensive liabilities in Luka and LeBron, and no backline protection to cover those guys when the rotations aren't there.
Well, not even, the backline necessarily, but also just on the perimeter. Like, even the way you're talking about that, they hedged on that possession. If the one I think you're talking about is where Dorian Finney-Smith and Luka were trapping LaMelo, and then they swung it out to Nick Smith, right? Is it Nick Smith Jr. and on the wing there, and he knocked down a wide open 3, and it was just, you could see the play kind of developing from a mile away, and yet they were kind of powerless. If you're going to hedge like that, you've got to put more on-ball pressure. You can't let them make that kind of an easy pass, and it was far too easy to swing it around and find a wide open shooter. So that's something that they're going to have to definitely tweak. They're going to have to make some kind of adjustments. I think it's a concern. Luka looks hobbled. He looks slow and sluggish. He's never been, an uber level defender or anything like that, but he looks particularly bad at this point in the season. You wonder whether or not he's going to be able to recover after missing a significant amount of time already this season, and whether or not he's going to be able to get a little bit of a spring back in his step and be able to guard perimeter players with some kind of intent and purpose, because right now he's just a body out there. He's not really doing much of anything. So the defensive concerns are fine. But again, I think eventually the offense will pick it up. And we saw him last season not necessarily be as porous defensively on the run to the NBA Finals. I think that's the goal, right? You're looking at this Lakers team. You're all in on this season. I think it's something that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show when you're looking at teams that have a lot riding on this particular year, but you acquire this kind of level of offensive talent, knowing that it's going to be enough to overcome whatever defensive issues you might have. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit more bullish on them than you are. I'm not overly concerned just yet. They're going to have warts. They have glaring weaknesses, but it's not something they can't compensate once the offense is clicking at a higher level.
Feels like every game that Luka has where it's just really rough around the edges again. In this one, just 14 points, 5 of 18 shooting, 1 of 9 from downtown to go with 6 turnovers. You got to imagine Nico Harrison is sitting somewhere like pounding his chest, pointing at the TV, being like, I told you guys. And we'll see how that plays out. Still don't think it looks good in the future for Nico. But coming up, let's talk about some Ja Morant trade rumors out of nowhere. Is Ja Morant potentially going to be on the move this upcoming offseason? And who has the most riding on the rest of this NBA season? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Using FanDuel's live betting feature is so easy, and it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three-pointer. Never feel like you missed your chance to get in on the action. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And continuing on here at Locked On NBA Game Night, where we're done with the games, but we've got some rumors to talk about here. We only had the one game to hit on, but out of nowhere, this seemingly random trade rumor, David, spouts up from Howard Beck of The Ringer, who said that he reported essentially that he recently spoke to an unnamed league source that mentioned that Ja Morant is actually a name to look out for that may land on the trading block this summer. And this is what Beck had to say. I'm constantly checking in with executives around the trade deadline about, what we see, what we didn't see, what's next. And somebody out of the blue said, keep an eye on Ja Morant this summer. David, what's your immediate reaction to this before we get to the Grizzlies' kind of response from this rumor?
It's always possible. Again, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, if you had told me that Luka Doncic was going to get traded from the Dallas Mavericks, I would have said there's no way in hell that that's ever going to happen. And yet here we are now talking about him and his poor fit on the Lakers. So look, anybody can get traded at any particular time. I know that the Grizzlies fans will certainly not want to hear that kind of news. And I know it seems like it comes from out of nowhere, but Howard's as plugged in as anybody. He's a longtime reporter, friend of the program, etc. He knows what's going on. If somebody's mentioning these things to him, it's because it's a legitimate name that other teams are looking at as a potential trade possibility down the road. I'm not saying that's going to happen. And that's something that, a lot of people have to take into consideration. He's not saying it's a definite trade going to happen. It's just that there seems to be the possibility that if things don't go smoothly with Memphis, given that they have a lot of players to have to cover under their contracts, and they're going to have to re-sign a couple of guys like Jaren Jackson Jr., et cetera. These are players that, eventually somebody's going to have to get traded. You're going to have to make some moves there in order to alleviate some of the salary cap stress with the new CBA. And we're seeing a lot of teams having to falter that way. We talked about Minnesota a whole bunch, having to make the trades that they did this past summer. It could be a possibility that Memphis might have to do something similar with Ja Morant, however unlikely it might be.
Now, we did have, amidst all this chatter for the past couple days or so, Grizzlies GM Zach Kleiman decided to come out and address things very directly, which is not usually a common strategy from GMs these days. However, I feel like we're seeing it more and more often with all the stuff, we had Pat Riley come out and say it with Jimmy Butler, and then look how
here we are.
Out. So here we are, right? We had a few years back, we had Daryl Morey say, I'm not trading Chris Paul, and then he traded Chris Paul a couple months later for Russell Westbrook. So maybe you don't trust what these executives have to say, but this is what Zach Kleiman, the GM for the Grizzlies, had to say. I can't blame other executives for fantasizing about trading Ja, but it's just that fantasy. We are not trading Ja. Continue to underestimate Ja, this team, and this city, and we will let our performance on the floor speak for itself. I'm not going to give this nonsense further oxygen and look forward to getting back to basketball. So a pretty strong sentiment from GM Zach
Perfect
Kleiman.
answer.
But
Right.
but at the same time, to your point, right? We just saw the face of the Dallas Mavericks franchise in Luka Doncic dealt. And I will say there's one little thing that makes me so curious about this rumor is I remember when the Rockets originally picked up Dylan Brooks, one of the things that I heard surrounding the team was that the two players on the Memphis Grizzlies who at the time were really vehemently against kind of we'll call it the immaturity on display by one Ja Morant and all this, the drama surrounding that whole suspension and that entire situation. The two most outspoken individuals about that behavior were Dylan Brooks and Steven Adams, kind of the veteran locker room voices. And look, I know DB is known for his antics and whatnot, but he is a consummate professional. He's a pro's pro. He's one of the veteran voices that the Rockets really did bring in to kind of help mentor their youth. And you can, get behind the villain persona, all that stuff. It is what it is. It's a persona. He's one of the best locker room presences in the entire association. And it kind of felt like the Grizzlies made him out to be a scapegoat when they decided to let him go and sign with the Rockets in free agency. So I do wonder how legitimate maybe some of those internal locker room concerns are about the maturity level or anything as it relates to Ja Morant. I know he's been, at least seemingly on the straight and narrow recently. Right. And I don't know anything fresh in this regard. Check out, the work of the great guys over at Locked On Grizzlies, DeMichael Cole, Joe Mullinax for more on what's going on with the Grizzlies. But I guess I wouldn't put it past the Grizzlies to maybe they're looking around and they're like, you know what? Nico got rid of Luka because he really didn't feel like they fit his, their competitive identity, what have you, all this stuff. Right. Maybe the same could happen for Ja Morant.
Yeah, I mean,
an interesting landing spot if Ja Morant got traded. That's the real question is like, what would the Grizzlies be trying to, who's even a comparable trade piece for a Ja Morant type player? The Grizzlies would want to stay competitive.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, like, I know there's going to seem kind of a homerish, you're already hearing trade proposals from Miami fans. Like they're always in a hunt for a superstar, et cetera. I mean, that's always a possibility, but like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the requisite return would be a young superstar, somebody that's equally frustrated. Like, I don't know what team is capable of making the kind of deal necessary to acquire a player of Morant's caliber. And so, I mean, you'd have to find an Oklahoma City Thunder, maybe with a combination of picks and things of that sort, but I don't see why they want to pair him with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and everything that they're building there. They don't really need Morant. So I don't know. Doesn't seem like there's any team that's like a perfect fit right now. Like he seems like he's in a really good place in terms of where he's at, and the team's got built around him and his identity to whatever extent that might be. And I don't know. I don't know if there's an ideal. Have you thought of a potential trade partner that you think might be a good fit?
I talked myself into one. So Orlando actually would be interesting, although that gives another whole, like, we still got to figure out, can Paolo play without the ball in his hands? Can Franz play without the ball in his hands? And then you add Ja Morant, who's another player who ideally wants to have the ball in his hands as much as possible, creating, getting downhill, all that stuff. So I don't know if the fit is great there in Orlando. What I will say is I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of a Ja Morant Trae Young swap. I don't know what the Hawks are trying to do right now. I thought they were kind of all in on this retooled version of their team. Then they seemingly, wanted to cut bait with a couple pieces and help some other teams out. So I don't know if they're, fully bought in on Trae Young being the future, if at some point he's going to be on the trade block. But I could see a world where Trae Young, if it's like a more or less straight swap, Trae for Ja straight up, miscellaneous pieces here and there, filler, salary, whatever. But if that's the crux of the deal, I wonder how Trae would look with this current Memphis team. And I wonder if he fits the identity more of this Memphis team than Ja does. But that's weird to say because Ja's been the franchise player, although earlier this season, right, he anointed Triple J the franchise player. He said that's the guy based on how well he's playing this season. So maybe I don't know.
It's an interesting fit. I mean, I'd never considered it, but I mean, it seems like both teams would wind up winning to a certain degree and still keeping a franchise level player there, a guy who and Trae Young is one of the best passers in the league, a guy who could shoot the ball, obviously, and he wouldn't have to play defense at a high level. He's certainly not going to be able to do that, but there's a good enough identity there, I think, and defensive identity in particular with Jaren Jackson Jr., that you could overcome some of his shortcomings on the defensive end out on the perimeter. So it's an interesting fit. I hadn't given that much thought there, but look, I know we should probably address the fact that Grizzlies fans are going to be upset about this. It's like, oh, why don't they just leave us small market teams alone, et cetera? Yeah. And I get that perspective, but look, there's enough smoke there, and we're seeing all these other types of players who have been linked in this. And I think when you start to do some of this reporting here, again, it's not like there's an indicator that this is definitely going to happen, but you have to do your due diligence. And this is the nature of the league: is superstars get to define what happens with their team. And this wouldn't be a trade that the Grizzlies would want to make necessarily, but if Morant is upset, if something happens this season and they don't go on a deep playoff run, or things fall apart, or you start to hear more and more rumblings maybe he's unhappy or something along those lines, then a trade request could come. And if that's the case, I'm not saying that it will be, it's just something you have to take into consideration. And there'll be enough suitors out there where you'll get a decent return for somebody like Morant. I know that everybody says, "Oh, leave our superstar alone. You don't want to hear from, et cetera. You don't want to hear when small market teams get picked on." But that's the nature of the league. Like Milwaukee's been dealing with that for years, and they're still going to be dealing with it. You know, Giannis Antetokounmpo, for all that he's accomplished there, it seems like everybody's been trying to trade him for the last 5 years at some point, despite the fact that they won a championship during that run. So it's just something that happens. You're going to have to learn to accept it. If anything, you could look at it as a badge of honor that you've kind of made it. You're on the map now because they're already starting to talk about trading your superstar away from your roster. So take it as a positive sign more than anything else.
Coming up, who has the most riding on the rest of this NBA season and potentially beyond into the postseason? We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On NBA Game Night. We thank you for making Game Night your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On show for your favorite team. Maybe it's Locked On Heat with David Ramil and Wes Goldberg. Maybe it's Locked On Rockets with me if you're H-Town Rockets fan, whatever. Or just go find the show for your favorite market, for your favorite team. All right, David. When we look at the landscape of the NBA as we're getting ready to set, I guess, well, technically we've already started with this Hornets win against the Lakers, but going down the closing stretch of this NBA season, which is a random sidebar. I hate that we call it the second half of the NBA season because it's more like the final 1/3 of the NBA season. Just a little pet peeve of mine. It really grinds my gears. Anyways, when you look at the lay of the land of the NBA, who are a couple of and we can go back and forth here because I've got at least a couple teams in mind for sure. But who do you think has the most riding on the rest of this season in particular?
I've got a couple teams in the East and a couple teams in the West. I don't know if there's a particular way you want to go about it. I'll start off with one of my East teams. I think the New York Knicks have a lot riding on this season. You don't make the trades that you do. You don't go all in. You don't trade away a guy like Julius Randle and acquire 2 All-Stars now, Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns. And you've got this revamped roster. You can't put yourself out there and say that you're a contender and then go through it, something we've talked about before, the same process during the course of the regular season where you wind up overplaying all your roster and then expect different results, which is where the Knicks are at right now, is that they're going to go through the exact same process that they went through last year. They're overachieving right now. They're the 3rd best team in the Eastern Conference. They're a really good squad. They look like legitimate contenders. And yet here they have these hopes pinned on a deep playoff run, despite the fact that they're not doing anything differently in terms of preserving their players for longevity, for the health of a postseason. And I don't know how you can marry those two concepts, being that they're so antithetical to one another, but they have expectations of bringing a title to the Big Apple. And I don't think that they're going to be able to I don't think they're going to be able to accomplish that goal, again, given the fact that they're following such a similar process to what they went through last year. So they've got a lot riding on this season in terms of building a contender, and yet they're going about it the exact same wrong way that they did last year. So I think they've got a lot riding on this season in terms of wanting to bring that title, of acquiring this roster, and trying to sell this team as a legitimate title contender. And yet I have legitimate concerns about their ability to actually win a title.
It makes you wonder, too, with the Knicks in particular, right? They're very locked into this core that they've got now with Brunson, with Cat, with Bridges, with Anunoby, all these big pieces. And they've got all the top-end talent in the world. Maybe there's a little bit of, left to be desired as far as their overall depth goes, which is why you see Tibbs riding the starters as much as he does. But it also begs the question of, if you have if they flame out due to, starters, injuries mounting up, or they're just too gassed, can't, sustain a postseason run into the conference finals or potentially a finals run, ideally, it makes you wonder at what point do they have to start looking at upgrading the head coaching spot, right? Tibbs has been phenomenal for the Knicks, but at some point, if Tibbs is too stubborn to change his ways, and if it's going to result in the same repeated, futile efforts in the postseason or whatever, because you can't change how you operate in the regular season, then at some point you're going to have to see if can Tibbs change, which I feel like he probably can't at this point. And then if not, then that's the only upgrade that you have left. You're locked into this core. You're locked into this roster. You have to find a way to upgrade coaching, because that's like the final threshold for a lot of teams. Case in point, you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? And the amazing work that Kenny Atkinson's done with this year's squad versus, JB Bickerstaff with the same group for he had that same group for roughly 2 or 3 years. So granted, different guys getting older, Garland, Mobley maturing, all these different pieces. So there's context there as well. But sometimes it's just as simple as upgrading the coaching staff, right? Mark Jackson to Steve Kerr all those years ago for the Warriors. That's another one. So, all right, let me take it out to one. Let me take it out to one in the Western Conference here, because I feel like this is maybe the most low-hanging fruit of all the teams. But I feel like the Suns have got to accomplish something.
What a shock.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. All right. Then we'll see where you think the low-hanging fruit is. But the Phoenix
No. I'm being sarcastic. I'm totally sarcastic. They have so much writing on this season.
My bad. Yeah, look, I mean, I feel like this Suns team could look absolutely completely different if they have a disappointing postseason. Well, first off, they're not even in the play-in tournament right now. They are riding a 3-game losing streak as we approach the second, coming back into the final third of the season here. They're sitting outside of the play-in tournament. They're only 1 loss ahead of the San Antonio Spurs right now, who obviously just brought in De'Aaron Fox, right? They've got high aspirations. They want to make the play-in tournament. I just don't see a way that this Suns team, I don't believe in them at all at this point. They didn't make any moves of consequence at the trade deadline, despite trading that 2031 unprotected pick to garner access to 3 awful first-round picks to try and grease the wheels on some kind of a trade. They missed out on Jimmy Butler. They marketed the fact that they were trying to trade Kevin Durant in some weird, we want to stay competitive, but we also want to build for the future. So now you've probably pissed off KD. Like, that team is no longer a powder keg ready to blow. It's already engulfed in flames right now, and we're just waiting for the end of this season, it feels like. And then an eventual KD trade, and potentially down the line a Devin Booker trade demand, get me out of here. I feel like the only way that doesn't come to fruition is if the Suns have some kind of Cinderella run to, at a minimum, the Western Conference Finals, where you can think, okay, if we change a couple pieces around, maybe we give Coach Bud another season. Like, I don't know.
You're absolutely right.
That team is a mess.
And it just seems so unlikely that these things have to break right. Like, I mean, that was a team with such promise in terms of acquiring superstars, but it just goes to show you it's never enough anymore. It has to have so many different things fall in place. It's not just about superstar level talent. It's about depth. It's about coaching. It's about getting everybody on the same page and having total buy-in. Like, you spent the whole majority of the season basically trying to go after Jimmy Butler and basically making Bradley Beal feel like a persona non grata, and now you're kind of stuck after the trade deadline going, no, we actually do appreciate everything you do for us off the bench. That was just a passing flirtation with Jimmy. We didn't really want him. What choice do you have? Like, you have to be able to now kind of assuage Bradley's feelings and make him feel better about his place on this roster. And KD, as temperamental as ever, who knows what he's going to want from one day to the next. Like, that is just. You're absolutely right. That team has exploded already. I don't know. I mean, you look at this group, and I don't even know that a deep playoff run would be enough to make things manageable either, because it just feels like everything is already set to explode, and you're just going to have to find a way of moving forward somehow for next season. And yet there are so few options other than to trade Kevin Durant. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if they look into trading KD over the offseason, knowing that that's probably the only step forward in terms of trying to rebuild or retool something around Devin Booker. And who knows? He might be the next name to drop, as far as a trade request is concerned.
There you go. We could absolutely see it. All right, hit me with your next team that's got a lot riding on the end of this season.
The Los Angeles Lakers. I mean,
really?
I think so. I don't think it's not a team built for short-term success. Or not long-term success or short-term success. They're built to win now. Like, you've got LeBron James. You traded away AD. Like, you've got LeBron and however long he has, and you want to be able to bring another title to Los Angeles. And that's why you make the move to acquire Luka Doncic, and you're making all these other moves in the periphery, trying to acquire guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, Mark Williams. Unfortunately, that trade, of course, didn't work out. But whatever, you're trying to shore up this roster for now. You're trying to sell LeBron James on the fact that we can rebuild another title contender this season. They've won a lot of games recently. They've shown some promise even before the Luka trade. I think they're in win now mode. And so I think there's always going to be pressure, especially when LeBron James is nearing the end of his career, where you want to be able to sell the possibility of being a contender. And you've got to have something to show for it, because otherwise you might be in a really bad place over the next couple seasons beyond that. Once LeBron retires and you're going to be, with Luka Doncic, and certainly unless, Dallas was right in their observations of what he's capable of, and maybe the injury concerns are greater, and maybe the health concerns and the whether or not he's in shape for the regular season, all these different kind of concerns that led to their trading him. You're going to be paying him a whole heck of a lot of money for a team that might not necessarily be a contender as currently constructed without LeBron James. So you're kind of in a win now mode. And so I think that puts a lot of pressure on this Lakers team to try and go on a deep playoff run this season.
Man, see, I absolutely don't see it that way. I see this season as like you're just playing with house money, because the investment was just, you got Luka. That's your plan. Like, obviously, you still have LeBron, and you would love to create an iteration of this team where you could win with Luka and LeBron at the same time. But I think you made that trade, and with the understanding that, it was going to be pretty close to impossible to tailor a roster to the strengths of both of those guys mid-season, as exemplified by the fact that they tried to get a Mark Williams added to the roster. That trade falls through, and then, he gets his revenge game against the Lakers in this one. But I guess to me, you're just playing with house money if you're LA. I feel like there are at least, at a minimum, probably 10 teams in the association, maybe more than that, who would gladly trade their entire roster for Luka Doncic and 14 G League players, if that's what it meant that you could have Luka for the next 10 plus years. And so I feel like LA is just playing with house money at this point. Like, if they can be competitive at the end of the season, sure. If they can go on a playoff run, awesome. But I think their real goal is to revisit this offseason, retool the roster, get themselves a capable defensive big to shore up some of the defensive woes with LeBron and Luka. And then just, their window, I don't think, starts ticking until next season. A team that I do think is on the clock for a lot of these same reasons, though, the other side of this Luka trade, the Dallas Mavericks. Like, ooh. I don't know if there's anything that the Mavericks can do short of winning a title within the next 2 to 3 years to try and regain some of the confidence of the fan base. But that, like, the clock is literally ticking on Dallas. And I think it's ticking as early as this season, because we talked about a moment ago, right? Kevin Durant and his, internal system, whatever, whether he wants out or not out of Phoenix. Kyrie's another one, right? Kyrie and Luka were incredibly close. And Kyrie re-upped his contract to stay in Dallas because of Luka. I could very easily see a world where Kyrie is so upset by how this whole situation was handled that he turns down his player option and just jets to LA this offseason and reunites with Luka, reunites with LeBron, and takes, a vet minimum or the MLE or whatever to sign in LA, because that would be the most Kyrie Irving thing to do, right? Is turn down a $40+ million contract because you felt slighted by the organization, and then go reunite with two of your old buddies that you've won with at the highest of levels. Like, come on. I think the Mavs are very much ride or die this season.
See, I don't see it that way. I feel like, when you trade away a player like Luka, especially given the injury concerns for so many of the players on that roster, you can't have expectations of being a legitimate contender this year. And so without those expectations in place, like, I don't know how much you can actually say is riding on the success of this season.
But that's why they traded for AD. They wanted to stay contenders. They wanted to compete at the highest level. That was the whole purpose of doing the trade. Even if you don't agree with Nico's logic, that's why they did it.
No, I get that. And at the same time, knowing that he's hurt for as long as he has been, and he's going to be out for a considerable amount of time. Like, I don't know. I see that point. It's not a good situation in Dallas there. So I've got Milwaukee. I think that's another team also in the Eastern Conference. Like, again, Giannis, and who knows if that's going to work out. You make that trade for Kyle Kuzma. You got Doc Rivers there. Is it going to work out? Is that a team that can actually legitimately contend in the Eastern Conference? And of course, you acquired Dame Lillard last year with the hope that you're going to go on a deep playoff run and be able to secure another title for Giannis while he's in a Bucks uniform. But if that doesn't work out, who knows how things could shape up? So that's another team that I think is poised for trying to go all in on this season with high expectations. But if they fall short, it could wind up being disaster.
I've got one more, and it's just going to be a very quick one here. Just a quick shout out to every tanking team in the association, right? The Wizards, the Jazz, the Bulls, just whatever, the Nets, like literally every team up and down the tanking list. Every single one of them wants that number 1 overall pick. They want free reign. They want to be able to win the capture the flag sweepstakes, right? Or potentially go another direction, right? Maybe Cooper Flag isn't the consensus number 1. Maybe it's Dylan Harper. Maybe it's Ace Bailey. But all those teams, and more that I didn't list off, every single one of them is looking for their franchise star player, their franchise talent to be able to usher in a new era of basketball for those organizations. So every single one of those teams have a lot riding on the end of this season, and in specifically those ping pong balls that'll be bouncing around later in May. But with that is going to do it for our edition of Locked On NBA Game Night. Thanks so much for being here with us. For your next listen, go find the Locked On Show for your favorite team. Until then, we will catch you guys on our very next game night.